We are continuing with the series that we've been doing for the month of July. We're working with an essay by Ralph Waldo Emerson called The Oversoul. It's a poetic exploration of some of the core concepts that we also find in Unity, because Emerson was a major influence on Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore. And our topic today is universal beauty. Emerson had these three core spiritual practices, and one of them was the contemplation of beauty in the world around us. And he was drawing on the work of Plato, who once said that truth, goodness, and beauty are one. And Emerson would add to that, he would say that beauty was the best of all three. And it all comes from this one paragraph in Emerson's essay called The Oversoul, which concludes with this line, which I believe Lynn incorporated into our meditation today. This one line here, which says, "Meantime within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one." The universal beauty. Unfortunately, I think the word beauty is very similar to the word love in the way that we use it in our pop culture. Pop culture has taken the word beauty and, perverted it, neutered it, and damn near killed it. Turn it into something shallow and superficial. And all you have to do to verify this is do the Google. Google it. Google the word beauty. Look for images, and this is what you get. Page after page after page of that crap. Which is trying to tell us that beauty is all about what? Body image and cosmetics, and a certain type of body image. I mean, the underlying message is about as subtle as a train wreck, if you know what I mean. If you don't measure up to these images, you're not beautiful. And that's the only kind of beauty that counts in our culture. And what a terrible, awful message it is that we're sending out to our young people. They get bombarded by this stuff every single day, so they probably really don't know what beauty is. And I'm not sure that it can really be defined. I remember when I was practicing law, one of the cases we had to study was about pornography, a Supreme Court case about pornography. And some of you may be familiar with this case too. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart wrote a concurring opinion in this case trying to define pornography. And here's what he said about it. He said, "I shall not today attempt further to define the kinds of material I understand to be embraced within that shorthand description. And perhaps I could never succeed in intelligibly doing so. But I know it when I see it." Pornography, I know it when I see it. So now you can go home to your friends and tell them that we talked about pornography in church today. You'll rise out of them. I know it when I see it. Is that really, you think, the best that we can do when it comes to beauty? Like pornography, beauty like pornography is in the eye of the beholder, this totally subjective thing? Is there really any absolute standard of beauty? Well, someone in our postmodern relativist world would answer that question with the resounding no, because they would reject any kind of absolute. Everything is relative to culture and context according to the postmodern worldview, which means, therefore, that everything is beautiful, right? But how can that be possible? How could that be possible? Everything is beautiful, no exceptions? If that's true, then you don't need the word beautiful. Just drop it. It doesn't describe anything unique. You could just as easily say that everything is. Stop right there. Leave the word beautiful out. No need for an adjective if everything looks the same. And yet, Emerson uses the phrase, the universal beauty. So is he a relativist, trying to tell us that everything is beautiful? Or is he trying to set up some kind of an absolute standard for beauty? And my question is, why should it have to be one way or the other? It's one of the basic challenges of human nature. One of the basic problems of our human conditions is that we keep letting ourselves get locked into this either-or way of thinking, convincing ourselves that we need to live at extremes. Absolute absolutes, or everything is relative. And we don't see the vast ground that lies in between, which is so often where beauty lies. Emerson is inviting us to embrace all of the many ways that we can experience and appreciate beauty in the world at both an objective and a subjective level. And I'm not going to give you any definitions here this morning. He's telling us to take a look around us. He says, look at, for example, the natural world using our senses to take it all in, to take in the sounds, the colors, the smells, the shapes. Everything has a different shape, the geometry, the motion of the animals, the motion of the plants and the breeze, the geometry of the landscape, all of those things. He wrote an entire essay called Nature. And he talks about beauty like this. He says, a nobler, I think we have it up here, there we are. A nobler want of man is served by nature, namely the love of beauty. The ancient Greeks called the world cosmos, beauty. Such is the constitution of all things, or such the plastic power of the human eye that the primary forms as the sky, the mountain, the tree, the animal, give us a delight in and for themselves, a pleasure arising from outline, color, motion, and grouping. He doesn't try to define it. He doesn't say how that happens or how it should happen. He just says that they give us a delight in and for themselves, spontaneously arising. Then a little later in that same essay, he has a whole paragraph about the actual practice that he goes through to experience that. And he says this, he says, standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite spaces, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. There's that theme again from the Oversoul, being part and particle of God. Again, no definition of what beauty is, just his way of experiencing it. It's a great example of mindfulness in action. Emerson wouldn't have called it mindfulness. That's kind of a modern term that we have for it. But that's what it is. All mean egotism vanishes. He simply takes in the moment, and then takes in the next moment. The moment-to-moment experience of the natural world, everything unfolding without adding anything to it, without taking anything away from it, or as our Buddhist friends would say, no clinging, no aversion, just the experience itself. He's able to experience beauty because he gets his opinions, his preferences, and his judgments out of the way, and then tries to get as close as he can to this direct experience of the thing itself. Another name for this practice that you might have heard is nature mysticism. Nature mysticism. It's an experience that cuts across religious and cultural boundaries. It's something that all human beings seem to have in common. And every one of us here today, I am sure, I'd bet money on it, knows what this experience of nature mysticism is, even though you might be hard-pressed to even come close to putting it into words. Such is the nature of the experience. It sometimes defies words, which is why it's so difficult to put it into a definition or into one single absolute technique. No attempt to define beauty, no attempt to set up an absolute standard. Emerson doesn't pick or choose. Do you notice there's no sense that he's trying to say that, oh well, that flower over there is more beautiful than, you know, this flower over here. He's not doing anything like that. He's not picking or choosing. He's not saying that one thing is more beautiful or better or more inspiring than the others. It's just the total experience that constitutes what he calls the universal beauty. And it's hard to get that. It's hard to get that sometimes even intuitively or intellectually, because we live in this culture where beauty is so one-dimensional. It's so shallow, it's so superficial, and we try to make it something absolute. That's why it's a valuable exercise to challenge ourselves with ideas like this from Emerson. That's why it's good to go back and revisit some of these old ideas about what constitutes beauty and how do you encounter it in the world, challenging our current assumptions and the things that surround us. And here I also want to add a word or two of caution about taking Emerson's ideas about beauty and nature too literally, because such a thing is possible. When you hear Emerson use the word nature, he meant the natural world, almost to the point of being in the wilderness, out there in the wilderness in a state of solitude. Emerson was a bit of a romantic, and he was also a bit of an idealist. And if we take things too far, we can actually end up limiting ourselves in terms of having that experience of universal beauty. Do I have to be in the middle of the wilderness or a forest in order to have that experience? If that's the case, then it's not universal, is it? If I have to create ideal conditions where nature looks a certain way and is in a certain form and a certain location, then it's not universal. I'm limiting it. Are we telling the millions of people who live in New York City that they can't experience universal beauty unless they either get out of town or at least get into Central Park? Could that possibly be right? That's crazy. That's crazy. About a year or so ago, I watched a movie, has a very simple title. It's called Happy. I don't know if anybody has seen that movie. It's called Happy. We need to show it here sometime. But one of the images that struck me was one of the very first ones. There was this fellow who either lived in, it was either India or Indonesia. He was a rickshaw driver. I mean, he would run with this carriage and tow people around town. He lived in a city. He lived in a shanty town. It was basically a plywood shack, very simple. And this guy was happy, content. He saw and experienced the beauty around him in the form of his children, in the form of his simple food, in the form of the clients and customers that he served. He didn't have to be in any particular place to be happy and experience beauty. He had the experience doing exactly what he did. Now you and I might take a look at that and say, oh, I could never be happy or experience beauty in that situation. Really? Really? Egotism at work at a subconscious and unconscious level says that conditions have to be just so in order for me to experience something. Hey, you people living in the big cities around the world, you can't be truly spiritual and experience universal beauty unless you build a yurt and live in the woods, right? We got to be careful, because that can actually be a form of bigotry. If you want that, if you like yurts and living in the woods, go for it. Absolutely go for it, but we have to be very careful about how that kind of thing can feed the ego. We can't use the term universal and put limits on it. True beauty. The message is that true beauty is pervasive and it does not depend on outer conditions being a certain way. This is where we have a lot to learn, again, from our Buddhist brothers and sisters. I think I probably told the story about my own gradual conversion to Buddhism back in the late 80s and early 90s. I was attending law school at the time when I first started my study of Buddhism. And when I went to law school, of course I went through a 3-year day program, and every day I would travel the commuter train from the Chicago suburbs into the city where the school was located. And I had a little apartment in a suburban neighborhood that was filled with tree-lined streets, and I would walk a mile to the train station almost every day. That was really the only form of exercise that I got, so I made sure that I did that. And the route would take me through residential streets, along a river for about a block or so, and then through a Main Street business district. Of course, before I rode the train, I got downtown into the middle of downtown Chicago. And my practice every day was to simply take it all in. The trees, the residential landscaping, the wildlife along the river, the cars, the buildings downtown, the tenements that we passed through on the train, whatever presented itself, my goal was to be aware of my surroundings every step of the way without judging it good or bad, or zoning out, or daydreaming, or sleepwalking during the part of the time that I was actually walking. It was part of my meditation practice. This was part of my meditation practice, and I will tell you, it was never boring, and it was beautiful. Or maybe I should say, it wasn't ugly. What's the difference? There we go again, right? Setting up these two things. What happens when I pick and choose? That's beautiful. That's ugly. Well, again, some help from our Buddhist friends. There's an ancient Chinese Buddhist poem that students often work with when they're getting started on that path. And the title of this poem can be translated as Faith in Mind, or sometimes it's called Verses on the Faith Mind. And I'd like to share the first few of these verses with you to give you a little idea of how this works. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. The way is perfect, like vast space where nothing is lacking and nothing in excess. Indeed, it is due to our choosing to accept or reject that we do not see the true nature of things. The experience of universal beauty is about getting as close as we can to the true nature of things. And I'm not sure that we can ever claim to see the true nature of things, because I get the idea that it's all a work in progress, which is why it's called the Great Way and not the Great Destination. It's why we talk about walking a spiritual path instead of arriving and stopping. Becoming aware of our preferences and opinions is the work of a lifetime, and those are exactly the things that can stand in the way of that experience of universal beauty, or truth, or goodness for that matter. So the message is, don't wait for what you think are supposed to be the ideal conditions in order to have that experience of universal beauty. Don't let anyone tell you where you should be or what you should be doing in order to have that experience. Because the really, really good news that we're sharing with the world here is that it's all around us all of the time. And our job is to simply wake up and walk the path. See you next week.